So Ashley Cornelius, if you saw on the website, is a creative. She is a poet. She has started an organization called Poetry 719 here in Colorado Springs. And she also works for Denver Health as a psychology professional. So, we are very lucky to have someone like her in our midst who can use art as a therapeutic tool for people that are suffering from all different types of pain. There's a lot of people in pain these days. So we can find a creative way to touch them and reach them so that they don't make the pain any worse is good for all of us. Ashley, what's up, my friend? Go ahead and take yourself off mute and let us see your beautiful self.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Hey, yes. So, you came right on time. I just introduced you as, being awesome, but I will give you the floor and let you introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, and give us your presentation today. I'm really, really glad that you're here to talk to us today. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for your patience on me. I just got out of a panel on racial injustice across Denver Health. So just popped out, just popped in here. So I appreciate that grace. My name is Ashley Cornelius. I am a licensed professional counselor candidate. So I work at Denver Health and am a therapist. So my background is in adolescent inpatient psych, doing group and individual therapy, poetry therapy largely. And I am now the RISE program assistant and manage this RISE program. So it's resilience in stressful events. So I provide peer support to anyone in the Denver Health staff community. So around COVID, racial injustice, anything that might come up, I help manage this program around peer support. So that is my day job. And then I am a professional poet here in Colorado Springs. I run a poetry organization with my partner called Poetry 719. We're a creative arts group that aims to uplift the voices of marginalized communities and people of color through creative self-expression and art. And so that has been going on for 3 years, and I have really harnessed poetry and art as a way for activism to lift our voices. And I'm so glad that I was invited here today. And I'm going to be talking to you all about poetry and creativity and how to use your voice as activism. And I will also perform a poem for you all and then have some Q&A at the end. Yeah. So again, thank you all so much. What I really want to share is the fact that, right, art inherently is a part of destruction. So I always say art is the antithesis of destruction. So when there is pain, when there is trauma, when there is unrest, people create art, right? It is almost always the ways in which we express ourselves, how we get things done. When our voices are taken away from us, we create art. I always look back to, right, slavery times when we were not allowed to use our mother tongues, when we were not allowed to talk or communicate. There was step. There was dance, there was movement, there's all of these ways that we can communicate, and that gets translated in different iterations into art. And so what I found as a Black woman in this community, and as a younger woman, that people weren't listening to me, right? I'd say, hey, this was actually pretty racist, and people would be like, no, it's not. I don't believe that. But then I would write a poem about it. I would get on stage and I would perform, and people would be like, wow, I have been racist. And I was like, what? Like, where is this disconnect? Like, we just had this conversation, and I recognized that art was the vehicle, right? My poetry and art for different mediums is the way that I can get my voice across. It's the way that I can lift up my voice and share and create change, and like lasting change. A mentor of mine told me that stories become transformative in the performance. And I believe that so deeply and truly in the work that I do, is that we all have stories, right? We all have lived experiences, traumas, expectations, worldviews, and those get transformed, right? When we perform, when we talk, when we storytell, like that's when we have this direct communication. That's when we have these engagements. And I hope almost all of us in the room have had a weird art experience, right? Where you look at a painting and you're like, whoa, like that hit, or you see a play, or you hear a poem, or you see a sculpture, right? We all have these ways in which we can connect so deeply and beautifully. And what I love most of all is that, right, art is interpretive. So there's my expectation of what my poem will be, and then someone will interpret that different. And then the retelling of that will be interpreted different. And like we can use this as a way to support ourselves and to really learn deeper about our community. And as a Black woman, right, in a predominantly white town and have gone to predominantly white institutions my entire life, sometimes it's hard for people to connect with me or engage, or they don't understand, right, my experience, and we never will, right? We can't really walk in each other's shoes. I think we can look at each other's shoes and sort of get a feel, but we'll never really truly understand. And so I found that art is this way of like connection in some ways that people aren't able to do in person, right? I think this one-on-one contact communication can be really jarring for folks, can be really uncomfortable. But if we use this like catalyst, right, of art, of creativity, of spoken word, like that can be this connective tissue to people you would have never ever connected with, right? And so I think that's why I'm so grateful for this opportunity to like start these connections and to build art as this like fantastic telephone, right? It is a way to like pick up the phone and engage someone and start these conversations and talk. And it has been truly like life-changing in my experience, and also healing. So as a therapist, I do poetry therapy, largely for kiddos, but I also do like creative workshops for adults here in Colorado Springs. And I found that that's also how we heal, right? Is like this talking, the processing, the storytelling, all of that is extremely healing. And verbal processing is super hard. And some people don't want to talk about when they were 10 and like the things that happened, right? That can be re-traumatizing. But the act of writing a poem or creating or sculpting or doing something like physical, kinesthetic, all of these art forms are such a beautiful way to turn what's happening into art. And I'll share my own personal experiences. I used to journal as a little kid, and I would write about my like terrible day and how I didn't like it. And then weeks later, I would revisit my journal and I would rip out pages and be like, whoa, my life sucks. Like, I don't want to remember this. I don't want to remember the day Bobby rejected me on the swings. Why would I want to memorialize that? Right. But we're always told, write things down, journal. And that didn't work for me. I just like couldn't. And so all my childhood journals are ripped to pieces. And so I was like, I still want to like have a chronicle of my life. And so I started writing very coded poetry that to anyone else would be like, oh, wow, this is a beautiful poem about a butterfly landing on a flower. And I'm like, actually, that is about when Bobby rejected me. Right. And so it was like this secret healing for me where I could go back and look at this beautiful piece of art. Right. Or like show this to someone. And if I wanted to, I could provide the backstory. I could give them the information. Or if not, it could just be this piece of work that represents me, my healing, my community, my communication, and someone else can have that as well. And so there's something so beautiful about encasing a message in art. And sometimes people get it. And like that's such a beautiful connection. And some people don't. And there's deep value in just people not getting it and just loving the poem about a butterfly landing on a flower, or loving the sculpture and not going deeper. And so this like challenge by choice of how deeply you want to engage and how deeply you want to, you know, present yourself and be vulnerable, which I think is an absolutely like incredible aspect of what art can do. Yeah. Um, and I think the other big piece that I want to share right around poetry and like healing and self-expression is that it is like truly and uniquely yours. And that's something that we don't often see a lot, right? It gets to be a part of who you are, this full expression and the ways in which like you get to represent your identity. My poetry is largely about being a Black woman and the intersections of my life. And so being able to like fully tell your story, to like represent who you are in a piece, in poetry, in spoken word. I know in the chat, right, they're talking about the slam poet who won, right? Of just like it is a part of communication, and we as humans are storytellers, right? Our language is like orally communicated, like that's how history was like transmitted for so long. So it's in our bones to share, to create, to translate, and something that people share about poets all the time is like, we find beauty in the details, right? In the weird stuff, in a grocery store trip, in a butterfly, in something that like isn't necessarily like big or powerful. And that's what I love, right? It reattunes us to the world of like, yes, I write about the big things, the big social justice, the injustices of the world. And yet I can find beauty in like, I can't find the other sock and I only have one sock. And what does that mean? And what does that represent? Is that the longing for like something more in my, right? Like you can just like go as deep or as not as you want. And I think that's so fulfilling, right? Right now it is hard. Like 2020 is so hard and it's so big and it's COVID and it's racial injustice and it's like rights and it's an election year and it's just like constantly in the piece that you can find and like just writing about a cool rock you found on the ground and like putting so much emotion and depth into this work. Yeah. I'm reading in the chat, right? Poetry is the most dense form of communication, most information transferred with least words. Oh, absolutely. Right? Like, I forget, and someone will tell me in the chat, I'm sure, but right, this poem, Baby Shoes for Sale, Never Worn, right? Like that is a whole story. That is a whole novel, right? What that means, who they were expecting, what happened. And so you can package so much information, so much pain, so much trauma in just a few words. And like that is effective communication, right? This is also where we can bring it in, even as this group of like utilizing poetry for communication, like how we can share so much and get so much across in just a few words, in just a few lines. Like how do we make sure that we're communicating effectively and passing on the information, the stories, the information, the resonance in just a few lines. And I think that is like, that's the beauty of it, right? And I'm like in it, in a poet, and I'm like jazzed. I'm like leaning in to all of this, but it really is this powerful experience of like how we use our voices in order to affect change, right? And even when we think about all of the beautiful speeches, all of the activists we see, like it's language, it's communication. And even to bring it like really close to home with George Floyd's murder, he called out for his mom, right? He called out for mama. And like that, just that one word alone resonates, right? What that means to connect, to call out to his mother who had passed away, like had been gone for a long time, right? The words that we choose, the way we express ourselves, all of that has deep, powerful connection, right? For some people, they said that was a call to action. For mothers, for caregivers across the globe, right? That one word was a call. And so really thinking critically, like, what are your one words? What are the things that you can say that bring people to action? What are the ways that you can inspire people, that you can engage people across, right, professions? What that looks like as a manager, as an accountant, as an architect. How can you make your communication effective? How can you make your like voice powerful and affect change? And when we think about change and activism and social justice and racial injustice, we always think about the disruptors, right? In terms of people in the streets, people protesting, people like just like being the disruptors. But there's so much more, right? There's the storytellers, there's the healers, there's the caregivers, there's so many other aspects of social change that come into play. And that's where art comes in, right? Art can be a part of every single thing that we're doing. Our voices can affect that change in all of our professions. And so that's really what I'm here to say, right? Is that it is absolutely transformative. It is a catalyst for change. It is a catalyst for right messages and transformation and stories and performance, and to really just hold reverent the fact that our voices matter, our voices are valid and get to be heard and get to affect change. And so that is like the biggest piece, right, of how important you are and how important it is to speak up and to share and to like lean into these artistic abilities in any way that you see, right? Whether that's engaging, going to an art gallery, listening to, right, a slam poet, but how can we engage in art and how can we integrate that into who we are, right? Into our healing, into our business practices, into the. So I am going to perform a piece for you all, and then I'll leave a little bit of time for questions. But this is a piece that I perform pretty often. I was on TedX Colorado Springs, and so this was the piece that I performed. A lot of my work focuses on stereotypes and kind of where stereotypes come from and kind of their history. So this piece is called Defy Silence. People have often called us Black folks loud, boisterous, and thundering. Our laugh, cackling cackles, and exuberant, exalting deemed uncouth in certain spaces. Our voices, cacophony to most ears, jazz to those with a seasoned palate. We turn up to turbulent bass levels. We bump Tupac. We blast Toni Braxton. We crank up Billie Holiday. We provide front row concerts to the entire neighborhood. We do not know how to mourn quietly. We wail and scream in hopes our voices are resurrection enough for our buried, even our whispers are seismic. There is no distinguishing between inside and outside voices. As caged birds, now free, we sing too loud and too often, making up for years of oppressed silence because being loud means you're alive. It means that you have found a way to survive and are celebrating, and we are defying darkness with demonstrative declarations of love, Dr. King once said. Our lives begin to end the moment we stay silent about the things that matter, which is to say, Black lives matter, which is to say, Black voices matter. When textbooks silence slavery and call it a cultural exchange, we get louder. When innocent Black girls go missing and the news reports a cat stuck in a tree instead of her name, instead of a picture, instead of an Amber Alert, we get louder. And when innocent Black men are murdered and their killers are called heroes, we get louder. See, we have been loud for centuries, and we will continue to raise our voices against injustice. We will dedicate our harmonies to Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a man whose voice was powerful, and his impact is still reverberating in our ears today. Do not think this poem is about the volume of our voices. This is about speaking up in a world that is expecting you to stay silent. So, will you join us and be loud? Will you defy silence with your voice? Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
That was beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you, my sister. So I saw a question. Carol Bach, is there a poetry jam in Colorado Springs where poets can recite their poetry and share it?
Yeah, there are lots of different poetry venues. Many of them have transitioned. So I'll spotlight ours first. So Poetry 719, we do open mics about 3 to 4 times a month that are free and open to the public. They have different themes, but we're having a poetry festival next week, October 21st to the 25th, as a part of Arts Month. So it's 17 events, all are virtual except one, poetry and hiking, but we have an alternative. So there's tons of spaces through Poetry 719. There is Poetry West, who has been doing a lot of work. They bring in different poets and have like writing sessions. There's Poetry Heals, that does a lot of work with poetry and in the community. I'm trying to think where are the other places that are hosting it. And then there's Soul Sundays, which is down at Club Tilt on Sundays for poetry. So yeah, I think there's lots of spaces. It kind of depends on the feel and the vibe of the audience, but I would definitely say check us out for Poetry 719. We have tons of events coming up, and it's a great place to share. And I think it's been a really great part of the community. And there's an event today, which I invite each and every one of you to. It's our Colorado Black Voices Matter open mic. It is the last one of the year. It is our longest running, most consistent event, and won a Pikes Peak Council Art Award in 2018. It is for everyone. So everyone is welcome to attend. We'll have a workshop, that anyone can share on. And then our open mic is just for Black artists. And then we're having a feature, which is myself, Christopher Beasley, and Philip J. Curtis. So the two co-directors and founder. Yeah.
Fantastic. Charlie, you have a question? You want to go ahead and ask it? That you put in the chat? Go ahead and take yourself off mute, my friend. That darn mute button. Get you every time.
It's a good thing. I just wanted to know how many other countries have a poet laureate like we have. I mean, that's a very high cultural standard. I think it's fabulous. Anyone know?
That is a great question. I don't.
I can share a little that we currently are in between poet laureates in this county, but there is a fabulous state of Colorado poet laureate named Bobby Lefebvre. And he is a phenomenal poet. And hopefully at some point we will find our way back to getting a county poet laureate, but still in between right now.
Right on. Jen, you want to ask your question? And then we'll go to Dave.
Yeah, Ashley, I love you. You're the best. Good to see you. I just want to ask, are you seeing more youth turning to poetry, especially with everything that's going on in the world? Are you seeing more young people turn to poetry to share and speak their voice?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. I think we are. Youth is always a hard category to encapsulate, especially now. It's really difficult, right? Because COVID has revealed a whole host of barriers in terms of like folks who have internet, folks who have computers, like all of the ways in which we have transitioned. Like many youth may not have that, but I've definitely seen an increase. I'll tell you what happens with youth events is if you hold a youth event, youth don't always come. If you hold a regular event, youth come in droves. So it really is about like, how do we like create environments that feel supportive and not like condescending? And I use that as a term that I've heard from you. How do we incorporate them within the community? Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to be a youth poet. I just want to be a poet. And I think more youth are turning to poetry and creative self-expression in these times because, right, self-care and creativity look a lot different, especially with quarantine, online classes. And so we've been getting a lot more submissions from youth, which has been great. I think now it's about how do we incorporate them in the community. The college age youth, which often get missed, is coming out in droves. And so we're really trying to target, right, high school, middle school, that kind of younger group of how to pull them in.
Right on, nice. Mr. Finkelman, go ahead and give us your question, my friend. Take yourself off mute, buddy. It's that mute button.
Mute, unmute. I have a very fundamental question. Why is free verse poetry? I always felt the poems had to rhyme.
Yeah, that is a great question. So whenever we talk about poetry, we're actually like not actually, we're lying, right? Poetry has structure. Poetry technically is like a sonnet, a limerick. It has structure and like boundaries and models. So everything that I particularly do is prose or free verse, right? So poetry is the catch-all term, but if we're talking technically, I'm not really doing poetry. So like a limerick or a sonnet, right, typically has iambic pentameter or has like a right, a rhyming scheme. So like A, B, B, A. So typically that's not what I do. And most slam poets don't follow those rules. And I'll also say slam poetry was born out of frustration with typical poetry and structure. And so that birthed this, like, I want to tell stories and I don't want to have rules. But you're totally right. We say a lot of things that don't actually mean anything. Poetry actually has a lot of meaning versus prose and free verse, which is what you typically see as people like don't rhyme and are more storytellers in their work.
Appreciate that. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Finkelman. So about 16 days ago, Ashley, you were on a panel with me for the Art of Social Justice. Thank you to Copper. Thank you, Andy, for helping us get that put together. Ashley, have you gotten any feedback about that panel? either positive or negative as far as how it affects the topic that we were discussing of social justice and arts?
Yeah, I've gotten like predominantly positive feedback of just people really enjoying the conversation, how it was structured, and that it gave a better picture of art. Again, I think when we think of art, it's predominantly performance based and so I think that panel allowed folks to understand that art as social justice and as activism can look so specific and different, right? Tony Exum Jr. doesn't speak really, like plays the saxophone, and yet he had such like vibrant engagement about how he enacts activism and social justice. And so it isn't always overt, right? It isn't always like I'm being an activist, like fist in the sky. There's so much more behind the artist and behind the performance that speaks to social justice, which I thought was really cool feedback from folks.
Did you have anybody give you any feedback on any aha moments that because of how we facilitated that conversation, they were able to better understand some things about the current state of our country in regards to social justice?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, art doesn't seem that deep, right? I think that was the ahas that I've had of just like, oh, you're just playing the saxophone, you're just putting on a play, you're just writing a poem. And I think that was the aha of like, oh, right, every person's lived experience is in their art, right? Because you're the one creating it. So like inherently it is connective tissue to who you are, your activism, what you believe in. And I think that was an aha for many people of just like, whoa, there's so much more that's going on in terms of like art and social justice and the ways in which we engage in the world. And I think I've gotten some feedback of like, wow, there is more than just having a play, right? There's like why we chose that play, who's the director, who's casting in it, like all of these other pieces that then like focus on, right, having activism and social justice in plays. And I think Lynn did a great job of saying it's not just doing Raisin in the Sun, right? And we can't just do that on February. We have to incorporate Black and folks of color like playwrights all the time in order to really achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is it can't just be specific. It has to be an ongoing integration within the arts community.
You know, I appreciate that, Ashley. And I want to thank you so much for being a speaker and coming after, dropping knowledge on Denver health, and then, you know, coming all the way over here to Rotary Club of Colorado Springs to give us some knowledge as well. Just to set the perspective for all of my amazing members here, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a priority for Rotary International. I am working with Rotary International to do a webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion that will be on November the 12th. They plan to have over 1,000 people on this webinar, and they picked me and like 2 other people to have this conversation. So I feel like this is my first global impact thing through Rotary, so I'm really excited about it. It's a tricky conversation to have. And as Rotarians, in everything we think, say, and do, it starts with, is it the truth? You know, and we as Rotarians, we cannot allow ourselves to be ignorant of things. And if we're going to open doors to opportunities for more people and more voices and more minds to become a part of this great global organization, we have to understand them better. We have to all open our aperture to something bigger. And in most cases, that just involves listening or bringing in the right people to help us get that perspective. So Ashley, I really appreciate you coming through today and helping add to that perspective. And I really appreciate the fact that you are sharing your gifts with the world. It is a beautiful thing that you have created here in Colorado Springs. And I'm really honored to be doing anything with you in Colorado Springs. So thank you for being part of our panel, our talk today. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. For those of you that are interested in making the global changes and doing great things in the world like we are, navigate yourself to CSRotary.org. And at the top of the screen, you'll see a Join Rotary button. It's online, no paper. Just fill it out online and hit submit. And we'll be in touch with you shortly thereafter. But other than that, I love you. I love you all. Have a wonderful weekend. God bless you, Papa Ted. We miss you. God bless. Y'all take it easy.